Hey, everybody, Eva here. I'm your co host of this podcast and founder of Wellacopia, the matching site that helps you find your ideal practitioners for your individual conditions and needs. And today I have the enormous privilege of sharing with you my conversation with the breathtakingly beautiful, inside and out, Nitika Chopra. We explore the concept of being an influencer and how it really translates to being human, dating someone who loves you despite your illness, and her definition of self love. There are so many accomplishments and admirable qualities to list about Nitika, but I have to kick off with a few of them. Nitika has been a leader in the wellness industry as a talk show host, on air expert, and renowned blogger since 2010. She has empowered thousands of women around the world to embrace natural beauty and establish tangible access to self love. Nitika is also known for her straightforward tone and intense vulnerability, which is why I had to have her on this podcast. And she recently took everything she learned from suffering with whole body psoriasis and psoriatic arthritis for the past 27 years to create a conversation about self love in the chronic illness community. There's so much more to say and so many exciting opportunities she is in the midst of creating for us. Hint, hint, look up Chronicon. But I want to jump right in. Please enjoy this very special episode with Nitika Chopra. Nitika Chopra, thank you for joining us on the Invisible Not Broken podcast today. It's truly an honor to have you on.
Thank you for having me. I'm super pumped to be here.
I so wholeheartedly say that because when I decided to launch this new series of conversations with chronic illness influencers or Spoonie influencers, you are at the top of my list because you identify or you embody that definition to a T. And of course, when I think of influencer, I really mean a leader because you're unwaveringly dedicated to support and empower. And it's abundantly clear how much you care. Like I feel your care on and offline, truly through your communities, through your content. And actually this morning, I decided to look at our first interaction, which was almost 2 years ago. And that was through email. I reached out to you because we had mutual friends and I started genuinely in the nicest way possible stalking you and could not reach out. From there we met and talked about how we have overlapping missions, and actually something we'll talk about later in the podcast, you alluded to something that you're creating now, and you're very dedicated to your word when you set out to do something. So I'm not surprised that it came to fruition at all. But so enough about this. I want to jump right in and ask if you'd tell your story, which is filled to the brim with adventure and pain and enlightenment. I really want to know how it impacted you back then leading up to where you are today.
Sure. Well, thank you for all those kind words and for having me. I'm excited to share and to chat with you today. So my story, I'm 38, so my story is pretty long, but what I will say is my health story really started when I was 10 years old, and I was diagnosed with a skin condition and an autoimmune disease called psoriasis. And I ended up getting it, pretty rapidly. It was kind of one of those things where I almost don't remember how fast it, grew, because it just felt like it was overnight, but obviously it wasn't exactly overnight. And it kind of went from just one spot on my arm and like a little bit in my scalp to growing from the tip of my foot to the tip of my head. And that did happen pretty rapidly. And then it stayed that way for the better part of 17 years of my life. And when I was 19, almost 10 years into that diagnosis, I ended up getting psoriatic arthritis. And so my bones started to deform, and I really couldn't walk without severe pain. So my health story has been pretty intense. And yeah, and it's interesting because now, as I'm like really taking everything I went through and doing everything I can to have it fuel my, purpose and how I help other people, it's been interesting because I've been like really reflecting on how almost grateful I feel. And sometimes I don't love it when people say, like, oh, I'm so grateful that this happened, because it's not the whole story, Like, yeah, I'm grateful, but this also really sucked. And this also was really hard. And it was incredibly painful and it was traumatizing. But lately, and obviously this is like 10, 11 years out of the worst of it, right? I've just been feeling really grateful to the fact that it was such a teacher in my life. And I'm not over it, right? Like, I still have psoriasis, I still have psoriatic arthritis, but I'm not in suffering the way that I was before, which I'm very, very grateful for. But yeah, it was my biggest teacher in my life. So that's a bit about my story.
Yeah, I don't know why we have to define it one way or the other if we're sort of on the the better side of it. It's we suffered back then, or we're still suffering, but that doesn't mean there's not a silver lining to it. I created Wellacopia because I experienced the same pain as the people that we serve. But I also still experience this every day, and it has impacted I pretty much my whole life, just like yours. And but I think what is part of being a leader in this community is that you're truly resilient. And not that that doesn't mean that you're not down to earth. In fact, I think you're incredibly down to earth. I actually, yeah. What do you think down to earth means in this kind of situation, or as a leader?
As a leader, I mean, I think I've never really thought about that before. I guess what I would say down to earth would mean to me is just like knowing that you're not special. Like, that's probably the biggest thing. And we're all special, right? Like, that's the truth. Like, we're all special, and like, you're not the only one that's special, I think, is the biggest humbling thing that you can think about. I'm very spiritual, so I think of everything as it relates to God, and not any kind of denomination, but just, spiritual teacher and like ruler of my life. And yeah, and so I feel like we are all God. We all have the ability to do every single thing that I'm doing. Someone else has the ability to do it. Maybe it's not their destiny to do it. Maybe it's not their desire to do it. But we all have our own gifts that we're meant to bring out and share with the world and share with people that are close to us. But at the same time, we all have gifts, right? So I think that's probably been my biggest lesson, as I've like kind of worked in the wellness industry in the self-help world for 10 years now. And I've been around a lot of leaders who, have sometimes rubbed me the wrong way and felt a little bit like they're on a pedestal, or, and it's not always that the leader is putting themselves on a pedestal. Sometimes it's a result of, their followers putting them on a pedestal. But there's so much totalitarianism where it's like, this is the way, and this is the yoga you need to do, and this is the thing, this is the only thing, this is the only celery juice. And like, I mean, don't even get me started. Right. And I'm just like, no, actually, like, the way is your way, whatever you decide that you want to do. I'm just telling you what I'm going through. I am not an expert in, like, I'm a patient. That's like really how I think of myself. I'm a patient, and I've built enough courage to be able to try to push through all of my fears to see if I can help someone. That's really it. And I happen to also really love branding, and I happen to also really love, public speaking and skills that happen to be really helpful for what I want to do. But I just think of it in those like nuts and bolts ways. I don't really think of it as anything else, and I think that that's, I think that's important. If I were to sit here and put myself on a pedestal or want people to put me on a pedestal, people can get knocked down from those pedestals so fast and in such crazy ways. And I think that's been a part of it too, is that I'm very sensitive. And so I always want to keep myself in check so that I make sure I'm presenting myself and showing up in the world in a way that I can be proud of and that has integrity, so that there's nowhere to knock me down from, because I'm not doing anything that's like not exactly how I feel. And I'm not saying I'm perfect, because I'm definitely not perfect, but that's even part of it, right? Like, I never said I was going to be perfect. I'm sitting here talking to you like basically in my pajamas, and my hair looks insane, and I'm like wearing glasses, and I'm just like, whatever. Like, my neck is hurting, my body is sore. I'm just showing up the best that I possibly can. But if I had, not taken myself way more seriously, in the sense of like, oh no, I have to be perfect all the time, and I have to show up the exact way, and I have to this or that, it just wouldn't, I don't know. I don't think it would serve anyone. so, yeah. So I feel like, being grounded and all of that is a spiritual practice, really.
And this is why I love you, because that's so evident. It's so evident in everything that you do. And I actually wanted to kind of break that notion when starting something like this, quote unquote influencer series, because I don't know exactly how that's defined, but maybe it's just a number of people who know you and love you and follow you. But a real leader is someone who is part of the community that they lead. And you really, really are that. I'm so glad that you're vulnerable in what you do, and you get, a taste of that today. And you are already, like, at the end of the day, we're all just human.
Yeah.
Freaking human.
Yeah, it's true. We're all human. We all, and the other thing I realized, like, a lot of us think a lot of the same thoughts at some point in our life, have the same insecurities. Maybe some have it louder in some ways and softer in others, but we're all pretty much the same, and yeah. And especially in the chronic illness community, it's like, I mean, and it's funny because I've started like watching myself even when I say chronic illness community, because I feel like we don't have enough of a community as much as I want us to yet, even. So those dealing with a chronic illness is kind of how I want to reframe that, because we need to have more of a community, which is what I'm hoping with your work and my work that we're going to be able to do. But yeah, I feel like that's what makes me feel that much more connected to people who are dealing with chronic illness, because it's like growing up, I remember always feeling very different than everybody around me for so many reasons. But a lot of it I see now as an adult has a lot to do with the fact that my body was going through such intense stuff that it made my emotional state so different. So like, if my brother is sitting next to me experiencing the same exact childhood, his experience of it is completely different than mine, because my body was falling apart, like at seams, like every day, and so that added a level of trauma and emotional, just exhaustion and so many things. So I think that makes me feel like we are in this together. I get so many messages from people who are like, thanks for my messages or whatever, my content. And I'm just like, girl, I'm doing just doing this right alongside with you. We're in this together. Like, I don't have all the answers yet. I'm just trying to tell you like the one thing maybe I learned this morning, and then we can try again tomorrow.
You do it in a really impactful way, which is great. And like you said, using your talent, like who you are, this is the gift that you have for the world, and you're using it to the best of your ability. For a community that you identify with. And that's wonderful. Like, I think the gift that I want to give to the world is connection. I love connecting with people. I think I'm good at it. I love to love. And so, yeah, I guess that's what I'm trying to do. And that will always be my journey, regardless of whether it's Wellacopia or something else. And I see that's the same with you. You want to make big things happen. You're not about doing things in a small way. like you were a talk show host and you were like, I feel like this is the way to get my message across, and your podcast and writing and events. Like I remember when we met, you'd done some major events before, and oh my, well that was supposed to happen. And where was I? I just have to remember to.
You said, I remember when we met, you were going to do some events or something.
Okay, yeah. So, yeah, you're just about having the greatest impact you can in I guess one entity or one medium. Which, if that's something you're good at, you're excellent at inspiring crowds, groups of people, and that's how you should do it. We all love listening to your voice too. I'm glad that you did a podcast because your voice is wonderful.
Oh, thanks.
Very calming.
Thank you.
Yeah. I know that's not something Monica and I have been praised for, or yeah, sometimes. I'm just very excited all the time.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. Which actually I love about myself. So I'm not going to put that
down.
I totally. Like being so passionate and animated, whether people can hear it or see it on videos. But I want to go back to us being the same and yet different. That is something I think about all the time, how we all have different journeys. We all have different ways of experiencing things, but we all feel the same things. Like feelings are the same, right?
Yeah.
The depth of them may be different, but everyone probably at a certain point has been heartbroken. Everyone has had loss. Everyone has had pain. Everyone has had joy, love, all of these things. And personally, that's how I like to connect with people, is based on feelings, since we all have them. And even in the respect of our pain, right? There's that pain scale, right? Yeah. And I guess that's very important from a clinical perspective, but I don't know if it's that important or as important when it comes to connection. Mm-hmm. So I know that, and I've admitted to this, that I don't on a regular basis experience as much pain as a lot of our listeners and a lot of people in the Wellacopia community. But I have, and I know what it's like in relation to this world. Right. And I'm sure you can say that as well, right? Like, actually, yeah, I would love to know your feelings when you were in the thick of it, like what that was like for you internally, because this is called Invisible Not Broken, and you actually have an illness that isn't actually invisible, but your experience was invisible.
Yeah, I mean, that was something I think I didn't really understand until I was older, because I was never around anybody else who was going through, and I think that's true for a lot of people with chronic illnesses. You know, they're like the one child in the family or whatever that has it. But so I didn't really understand the whole like invisible illness thing. And as you said, I didn't have an invisible illness. But the thing that was interesting that I'm realizing more and more as years go by is that I didn't have an invisible illness, but with psoriasis, people just thought it's just the skin, you know? And so that was and this is even before I got the arthritis, but that was a huge issue because I spent a lot of time feeling the tremendous effects of like the inflammation and the, autoimmune response in my body and the flare-ups and the internal things going on. So I would feel exhausted. I would have brain fog. I would feel irritable, like all these things that now when they happen, because they're so rare, I'm like, oh, well, Jesus Christ. Like sometimes I'm like, how did I ever survive my childhood feeling like this all the time? And I remember, and no one understood, myself, my family, my doctors, no one understood what I was feeling. And so I felt like, I remember when I was a kid, I would go to the nurse's office like every other day in school because I felt like I had a fever of like 110. Like I just felt there was so much heat radiating off of my body. My mom literally used to say it was hard for her when I tried to sit on her lap because there was so much heat radiating off my body.
So she actually felt it wasn't just you.
Yeah, it wasn't just me. Yeah, it was hot. And I would go to the nurse's office all the time because I felt so sick from like the inside. It wasn't, the skin was that's a whole other thing, right? But no one understood. And everybody would always be like, what's wrong with this kid? Why does she keep saying that she's sick? Or why does she keep, why is she lazy? Why is she not this? Why is she not that? And for the longest time, I thought I was like really lazy and really incompetent in a lot of ways because I wasn't focusing at school. I wasn't good at school. And I never had the energy to do like basic stuff, But afterwards, after a while, I realized I am not anywhere close to being lazy. Like I am not anywhere close to it. I was sick. And I didn't feel good. Like I really did not feel good for most of my childhood, most of my life. I mean, it was a good 27 years that, I was feeling pretty sick. So I don't know. It's just been so that's kind of what my life was like, earlier with the symptoms and everything that was going through physically. So yeah.
Isn't it amazing how when that experience is invisible, people make you doubt yourself. Like they doubt or like invalidate what you're experiencing. And then you start to feel like you're crazy. I know I felt like I was crazy for a long time, especially because, I'm not lazy in the slightest. I'm very type A, very adventurous. Like I love being physical. I was a serious ballet dancer. And then, I don't know. I think my parents, the word hypochondriac when I was young floated around a couple times, and naturally a couple times was enough to remember that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do know that a lot of people with psoriasis, or that know about psoriasis, just think of it as like, some patchy skin or like some, it's, and since your psoriasis was though, really intense, you said that you had it from head to toe. What were people's reaction to that? Like, what kind of validation did you get there?
Well, I mean, I think probably from my parents, as much as we had a lot of disagreements, like the one thing was like, I used to, because it was so itchy, psoriasis itches like chicken pox. And I used to wake up every morning with like my sheets were like bloody because I just annihilated myself in the middle of the night because that was the one time I couldn't stop, like I couldn't control myself. And so it was like things like that I remember. My parents, they're immigrants, they're Indian. Like it's not like they were sitting there validating me all the time. That's not the way it works. But I feel like in moments like that, when my mom would just like, okay, I'm going to, change your sheets, get ready for school. Like, don't worry about it. Things like that. She was like my nurse, like most of my life, and, yeah. And so like, and then they also were really good about like just trying everything. And I think about this a lot because I feel that I have a tremendous amount of privilege to have a family that can help me. And I know I do because most people in this country don't have that privilege. And that my family was, we're not like wealthy or anything, but we were well off enough that if like we had to pay $500 for a stupid test that I had to take and it was like a detrimental test, like my parents could help me, So I feel that they showed me their validation in those ways, which is vital, and then like, just in terms of like, well, people would see it and stare a lot. I just got stared at in not good ways my whole childhood. And that was really hard, and I remember probably one of the biggest things my mom and I like talked about when I started growing up is just that like, she was always trying to protect me from people staring at me. So she was always like, don't wear the dress or don't wear the short sleeves or don't, cover up. And I remember getting so upset with her about that when I was younger, because I was just like, I actually have the courage to show up and be like, who cares if someone's staring at me? I cared, but I was like, I'd rather just be me, right? And she just didn't want me to get hurt because she knew it bothered me. It's not like if someone stared that I wouldn't care, you know? So we talk about that a lot as I've grown up and said, like, I wish you would have just like been like, screw it, honey. Like, let them stare, you know, it's totally fine. But she wasn't, you know, she didn't know how to do that. She did her best. So yeah, so people would stare, and my parents were great.
Yeah, and even when we have great parents, a lot of they're still people and don't always know how to handle situations. I'm sure she didn't prep for having a
Yeah,
daughter with psoriasis.
yeah,
And there was love in what she was doing.
absolutely.
At the same time, you were like, okay, but I want to handle this differently. And is that what brought you to your sort of career journey of self love? Because I know now you're really focused on inspiring the chronic illness community, but it really started more with general self love and beauty in and out.
Yeah, yeah, it did. I only started talking about chronic illness in this like very aggressive way. Um, probably probably the end of 2017 was when I started to do that. I think that was right around the time that we met, actually.
Yeah, that was our first conversation. I think one of the reasons you wanted to meet with me was this is where I want to go now. This is
Yeah.
I'm pivoting my career. Um, these are my people, and I want to work with them. So yeah,
Yeah.
in November 2017. So that was
Yeah,
right.
that was like a month before I kind of more publicly, like on social media, started talking about it, and you had emailed me. So it felt very serendipitous. And yeah, I think so. I started doing what I'm doing because for a lot of different reasons. I mean, one, I had tried to be an actor in my early 20s. I'm not a good actress. I just need to be myself. Like, I just, so that wasn't going to work. And I also didn't like the superficiality of the industry, and I didn't really love for some people I didn't look Indian enough, for other people I didn't look this way, and I'm like, okay, I don't want to be what you need me to be, you know. So that didn't really fly, but I did try it because I always had the skill of like performance. That was always just from a kid, that was just always a part of me. So I kind of thought I was supposed to do that. But then before I started all of that, I had done, which we've spoken about, the Landmark Forum, and I had trained to be a life coach, and I had started when I was married. My ex-husband had really been the one to show me all of this introspective work and like the study of how you're being and all of those things that my parents never knew anything about. And I never had anybody in my life teach me that. So he was really the one, and we got married when I was very young. So I was 20 when I got married, but he introduced me to the Landmark and all these things when I was like 19. So that kind of started that part of myself developing of like a deeper, way of thinking and just managing my emotions better and things like that. And then I also loved this performance aspect. So I had kind of been on this mission of trying to figure out, I kept praying, like, how am I gonna merge these two worlds? I don't really want to, not that there's anything wrong with either, but I could just feel for myself like it wasn't enough for me to be only a coach and to just coach people all day. Like, that's for the people who are meant to do that. That's freaking awesome, and it's amazing. But I just knew that wasn't the full story for me. And I also knew that the performance thing like wasn't the full story for me. You know what I mean? So I was just like, neither of these things feel like fully it. I feel like they're kind of, half of it. And so, yeah, I kept praying and I kept asking God, like, show me what I'm meant to do. And I also had this really deep knowing and like message from God that my journey had been, not really about me, and it was meant for me to share it with other people. And I had felt that from a very young age, even though I had no idea what that meant. And so, yeah, so it was just like a journey around that. And I would say from 20 to 28, when I started my company, it was kind of that, of just like trying to figure out what is this going to be? What am I going to do? What is it supposed to be? And then I decided that I was supposed to have a talk show that, helped people, right? So not a talk show just to have a talk show, but a talk show to help people. So that was me merging both of the worlds. And, it's a very long story, but essentially I ended up building my own online magazine and, my own online platform. And I had all these contributors writing for me, and I did video and I did all these things. And my goal was to have somebody see it and one day decide that like I deserved to have a talk show, because I had no money. At this time I had just gotten divorced. So I had, and my parents were living in Hong Kong. So I didn't have any resources. I didn't have any experience, so I was like, okay, no one's going to give me a talk show just like this. I have to show them that I'm supposed to have one. And 3 years later, I got a talk show from starting that website. So that was cool. But yeah, to answer your the base of your question about like pivoting, I really did just the self-help wellness stuff for a long time, because I think a lot of people, we could get away with it in some ways. Like you didn't have to and not that I ever thought of it that way, but that's how I'm thinking of it now. Like we never had to go deeper, right? Because society wasn't pushing us to. And people were okay with me just talking about beauty. And I weave my psoriasis story and my skincare and stuff in the middle of it, but it wasn't as heavy and raw and, vulnerable as it is now. And I didn't know, to be honest with you, I didn't know how to get there a lot of the time. Like I knew how to do what I was doing, and it was always very authentic. But I knew I also needed to go deeper. And every time I would try or think about pushing and going deeper, it just wasn't happening naturally. So I just wouldn't do it. And then I think after the election in 2016, everything just totally changed. And we went from living in a world that was full of suffering, but that people ignored, to living in a world that's full of suffering that you absolutely cannot ignore. And I just feel like my work changed so much. I went through a time where like I wasn't working as much because things weren't clicking as much. And then eventually at the end, and all of 2017, I kind of spent the year like just being like, what is this next thing supposed to be? What is it supposed to be? And then by the end of that year, it was when I was like really struck with, I had spoken at this event, and I spoke to a bunch of women who asked questions at the end, and the women that had chronic illnesses at the end that asked questions, I helped them in ways that I never knew were possible just by being myself, and it was life-changing for me, because I was like, that is the feeling I've been searching for my whole career. I didn't know how to get there. I didn't know, this is what you want me to talk about? Like, really? Okay, I can do that. So that was kind of the trajectory of everything.
So you could say in a way it fell into your lap, but not really, because you declared that you were going to do this. You declared that you wanted to find a way to express what you believed in a way that resonated with people. And because you were open to that. Again, I love when you say that you asked questions to God and you were looking for those answers, but within yourself, with like hearing. I know that when I pray, and I definitely ask questions out loud, and it's amazing when you do that how they come to you from whatever spiritual source. I mean, I did that in sort of a transition with Wellacopia, like we were talking about recently. I asked myself, so I was also at a point where I actually didn't know if Wellacopia could continue, because from the business side, it's just me. And I thought, how, first of all, am I ready to let this go? And then the message that was sent back to me was, first of all, no, this is not over. This is not over. And the reason was I'm so deeply want to help people in this way. And I know that that's how you felt as well. And this idea of bringing community together to build it has brought me almost close to tears on seriously a daily basis talking to everyone. Not to get in to that, but I love that it's something you couldn't ignore. Your intuition is so strong. I love when you talk about your intuition, how you feel so deeply, and you know that it's not something you could ignore. It's like it speaks to you. What are some other moments where that happened that really stick out to you?
Oh gosh, there's been so many. I mean, it's pretty much every day.
Yeah.
When I'm open to it, because there's times when I'm not open to it and I'm being a brat, and then God's like, okay, I'm going to take everything away from you, and then you'll start listening to me.
Yeah.
Basically, our pattern, and it works because then I start listening. But yeah, I mean, it happens all the time. Like I think the first thing that's coming to mind is, I know we haven't talked about Chronicon yet, but I'm building this project, and it's been like it's been so terrifying and so amazing. But like I first thought about this new project in the fall of 2018, and I remember I'll probably never forget the moment that I realized that I was gonna do this thing. And it's like I know when I'm in this space of like I'm receiving information versus like I'm pushing a result. You
Mm.
know what I mean? It's a very different space. So I was standing in the middle of KirbyCon, which is like a conference for curvy plus size women, and I had never been before. And now I'm friends with the owner, with the founder, one of the founders, and I was so inspired, for these women. I was just like, oh my God, like they have built this like mecca where these women who, oh, sorry, it's an alert on my computer. These women come to KirbyCon and they are revered and they are loved. And the brands are like not talking to them because they're pitying them or something and like, oh, sure, we'll get you a plus size outfit. They're like, girl, you are fabulous and you deserve to be here. And where have you been all our lives? Like, you're so amazing. And I was walking around seeing all of this and it's palpable, and there's hundreds of women. And I was like, what would it be like if someone who had a chronic illness felt this, who like came to something and they were like, girl, I don't care if you have psoriasis all over your legs. Give me those toes. I'm going to give you a pedicure right now. It's going to be amazing. So what if you've got alopecia and you can't get a braid bar braid? I'm going to, massage your scalp and it's going to be amazing. Like, we're going to do this. You know what I mean? Like, whatever it might be. And I was just like, I know I would have loved that, right? Because I have so much trauma around all of those different things. And I just started walking around and I was like, what would it be called? Like chronic conference? Like, I don't know. I remember like trying to figure it out. And then I was like, Chronic Con? And I was like, really, God? Really? You're giving this to me now? Like, that's how I talk to God. I'm just like, we're best friends. He gets on my nerves a lot of times. And he's also my favorite being, spiritual being, but still. So, I don't know. So I was walking around and I had this epiphany, I guess you could call it. And then for months after that, I was like, I don't know, God. I'm not really sure. I kind of know I could feel the energy of what it was when I felt that connection to creating that thing. I was like, oh, I can feel that this could be a big undertaking. And I was just like, listen, God, I'm not sure if you got the right girl. Literally, these are the conversations that I was having with God. And I was just like, I still have 2 chronic illnesses. I've done so many events in my past and they like almost killed me sometimes because I was just doing everything myself. I don't have any capital. Like, who the hell do you think is going to put on this conference? Like, I was just like, I'm not sure if you have the right girl. So then I didn't tell anyone for like 6 months. And then I told my friends at Healthline Media, and I have this one girl in particular, Nancy, over there, who does all these partnership, influencer partnerships and stuff, and she's been awesome. We've worked together for years. And she was coming into the city, into New York for a visit. And so I kind of was like, I haven't told anyone this, but I have this idea and I just need someone to tell me if it's insane, because it's not letting me go. Like, it's just holding on to me for dear life. And she was super into it. And I was like, okay, great. You should just get Healthline to like do the whole thing with me. But they said no at first. And it was amazing. It was actually the best thing that they could have ever done, because it forced me to, it forced me to get scrappy. It forced me to think about things and really ground myself in what I needed and what I wanted, and get a few things settled on my own. And then when, a few months later, like a little bit into the planning process, I called Nancy again and we had another conversation. And I was like, how about you guys just do this one part? How about we just do something, because I couldn't see Chronicon happening without Healthline. Like, it just didn't make sense to me. And she called me back and she said, we want to do it all.
Yeah.
And it was amazing. But even though, like, I guess like the whole conversation about intuition, like what I'm trying to say is that all of this has been like one intuitive moment after another. And when I'm the most frustrated, it's when I can't hear what this higher message is trying to tell me. Like, and that happens, it just happens because I'm tired. It happens because I'm stressed out or I'm busy. It happens because I'm like, being stubborn, like whatever. It happens all the time, right? And when it happens, I have to really just like unplug my computer and, take time to myself and just really not, push myself to do anything. And then the messages start again. So.
Like I said, you don't do anything small. You're all about the big. And I love that it's kind of going with the flow, but the flow being your energy, your intense energy to make things happen. And that's beautiful, because a lot of people get really scared by that. Sorry, I know you get scared by it. We all get scared by it. But as you said before, you have courage. And it takes time to build that courage. And a lot of us have it because of our chronic illnesses.
Oh, yeah.
We're resilient in that way. And so I guess that's part of the silver lining we were talking about, right?
Yeah.
Is we become strong in our own ways. Like, actually, I want to mention this. Someone posted on social media, I don't know if it was a quote, something that really resonated with me. They were kind of angered by the fact that people call those with chronic illnesses brave. And usually I'd be like, you're so brave, you're so strong, yada, yada. But the truth is, we're all brave in our own way. We all have our own difficult situations and life journeys. This happens to be ours. Some might be more courageous than others, or going through that to become more strong, brave, resilient, what have you. But it's actually another way in which we're all human.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally get that. And I also think that, like when I hear that, like, you're so brave, I'm just like, I didn't ask for this. Like, I'm just showing up for, the call that has been given to me, but I didn't ask for this. Like, I'm not being brave. I'm maybe being strong because I have to get through this ridiculous amount of pain or whatever it is. But I don't know, something about brave is almost like you're choosing something, or I mean, it's probably not the truth, but that's how it feels, something about brave feels like, oh, I'm going to be brave and like ask this guy out, or I'm going to be brave and like climb this mountain. And like, it feels like more like a choice, I guess, in the way that it's said. But I don't feel like I'm brave for living the trauma that I've lived with my body. I'm like, I'm resilient and I'm strong because I got through it. Right. And I'm still getting through it. But yeah, brave is not the word. I agree. I wouldn't use that word to describe it, because I'm like, I didn't choose this. Like, this wasn't my choice,
That's a good clarification of choice between being strong and resilient and getting through whatever one is going through. Yeah, brave. Yeah, when I think about brave, I actually go to like a Disney movie where I think about the prince storming the castle or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, That really is so true. Back to Chronicons, I really want to talk more about that. First,
Sure.
I love the name. It really is so perfect. I'm glad that came to you. But yeah, can you tell us a bit more about what it is going to be like?
Sure, yeah. So it's happening October 28th, and it's happening in New York City, right in Union Square on 17th between Fifth Avenue and Union Square West. And yeah, I'm partnering with Healthline for all of it, which is great. So they're making sure that, like, if anybody's listening that can't make it to New York, it'll be live streamed. And like, there's just so many awesome things that they're helping me with. They're also co-creating all the content with me, which is really great. So we're picking some amazing speakers, and we're pretty much all set with our speakers, which has been a really fun process. And it's going to be from 10 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. And so 10 a.m. to 5:30 is like all content. There'll be lunch included and all these different things and all these panels. There's going to be panels like chronically capable of love, and talking about like intimacy and love and how to love yourself, and then how to love in a relationship when you're dealing with so much with your body. Or Am I Sick Enough, which is like talking about invisible illnesses and like the, ways people are treated because they don't look sick. And things like that. So it's going to be a really special day. I'm really excited about it. And then from 5:30 to 7:30, we have what I'm calling the Chronically Conscious Connection, and it's going to be basically this awesome 2-hour party of like delicious foods and great brands and partners and like photo booths and things that are really fun, that people will be able to participate in. So that's a little bit about it.
Fabulous. I love it. It's like educational, inspiring, but then also a party.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, actually, yeah, I didn't mention this earlier, but something we did do together, a little thing was you were a wonderful guest at my at Wellacopia's Care Fair.
Yeah.
And I there was a similar feel to it. I called it the Care Fair. Actually, I really wanted to call it like Pamper Party, but pampering really wasn't the right word because I wanted the word party in there. That was sort of the essence. Was it was about self-care and making that a positive thing rather than an obligation for people with chronic illnesses. Sort of like, a celebration of care. I really thank you for being a part of that. It was very special. I love that you had a fireside chat that was very intimate. It was perfect for that kind of environment, and I'm glad that now you're taking it to like such a expansive level. Quite honestly, and I hate this, I am actually going to be in London during Chronicon.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it's like, I'm not going anywhere other than that, like anytime soon. And
oh, wow. That's so funny.
Hear about that, but I will watch the live stream. I know I can at certain points. What's interesting about me going to London at that time is it's for my first cousin's wedding, who really is like my brother. He just happens to live in England. And he has a very serious, lifelong, honestly, probably fatal illness. And I've been trying to open up with him about that. I don't know if he'll ever listen to this podcast. I hope he does, though, actually, at the same time. Because I don't know if it's men. I mean, I hate to judge that way, but look, a lot of people who talk about chronic illness, we've even been alluding to the fact that it's mostly women. Because women are now becoming more outspoken. We're more in touch with our emotions. Again, I'm speaking just generally, and this is for everyone. And I really want him to be able to do that. Mm-hmm. At the same time, I know that part of his way of dealing with his illness is ignoring it, except for the things he has to do clinically. Right. He even said that he has cystic fibrosis, and he said he lives at like I remember what he said, let's say 75% lung capacity, because it's pulmonary illness and amongst other things. And he said he does that because he wants to live as normal a life as possible. So he's okay with being at that capacity. I don't know. I felt like sharing that all of a sudden, but also I will be at his wedding.
Yeah.
I'll be like thinking about both things that day. and actually something else I do love about this marriage that's happening is he has had a hard time with dating
Mhm.
because he obviously can't hide this illness, nor should he.
Yeah.
And it is a lifelong thing. And he found a woman who obviously, like, she cares about him, but that's not a part of his identity. And I do love that. And
Yeah.
when they got engaged, it was actually the first time right after he was hospitalized, the first time in like 7 years. And she was still like, this is my man. This is the life we're going to live. And I'm here and I'm down for it.
That's
And
awesome.
I, oh God, I have to not cry now. Like that was, I was so happy that he found someone like that. We all deserve someone like that. I mean, everyone in the world deserves someone that accepts you for everything that you are. But I do know that dating with a chronic illness can be particularly difficult because it means that in some respect, even if it's not as much anymore, they need to take care of us. They're part of that. Um, I
Yeah.
Are you interested in sharing about that around dating?
Oh, sure. What do you want to know?
I guess I mean dating's hard period, especially in New York. I used to live in New York City, used to date. I found my man on an app, which is a miracle. Um, but yeah, has there been any difficulty with dating in relation to chronic illness? And what have you learned from that?
Yeah, I mean, not as much anymore because it's not debilitating and, that kind of thing. But absolutely. I mean, when I was getting engaged, I was the sickest I've ever been. So, like, I mean, my ex-husband, he was although we didn't last, he was a miracle in so many ways because he never saw my skin. And he always saw, like, the woman that I am today, he always saw her. And I couldn't even see her. I was like, no, I'm this like diseased, scaly person who like is tired all the time and whatever. But he always saw her. So from that way, I had a lot that I had to overcome in order to be okay with being vulnerable with him. But he never made it hard for me, which is great. And then after that, in my 20s, especially, because that was when my psoriasis was like the worst. Yeah, I don't know. I was pretty lucky to meet men that really didn't care. Um, but it's not like, I think the thing has always been is that I care,
Right.
right? It's like I didn't want to have scaly legs and, I didn't want to have like flaky skin or be scratching and bleeding and all of that crazy stuff that was happening to my body all the time. So it was more of that. And I also think it was also a lot about like I've had to really work on my self-esteem and just like knowing like and being comfortable with the way that I look or the way that I present myself or the way that my body is, and whether that's because my weight is fluctuating, which happens all the time and I've been talking about it more and more lately, because of my inflammation or my digestive issues or my hormone issues. It's like things are always fluctuating. So even that brings up insecurity, or, then me being insecure about my skin. So I've just really had to really work on my self esteem so that when I meet someone and I interact with a guy, I don't need him to fill my self esteem cup. Like I'm doing that on my own. And he happens to also be somebody who thinks I'm great. You know what I mean? So it hasn't been such an issue that like the guy makes the thing of my condition. It's been more how I feel about myself because of it. So that's been something I've had to really work on, which I've, come pretty far with it. But initially it was really hard.
Yeah, I would say so. Thank you for that. And I truly agree with it, especially when it comes to things that are external. I feel like that might be, no pun intended, an extra layer of um, of difficulty sometimes because it's so out there in the open. And your ex does really sound like uh, he was an angel. And I assume he still is a wonderful person.
Yeah.
Yeah, uh, seeing through that. But yeah, self love. I mean, self love is everything, and it's so much harder than it sounds, but it is real and ongoing. I think that given that you are a self-love guru, actually, how would you define self-love?
Well, I have a definition actually.
Fabulous. Fabulous.
So I decided I needed to make a definition for self love because it feels very intangible and very esoteric, and it's hard to kind of feel like you know how to, know if you're having self love. So my definition of self love is the ability to be more committed to your happiness and to your suffering in every single moment. And and you can interchange those words if you want. You can say peace to your trauma, like whatever you want to say. But for me, happiness and suffering really just stood out so strongly because I felt like there were these clear forks in the road in every moment for me. Like I could, and it's still that way, right? Like I can get off, from doing this podcast and I can go do something that makes me feel nourished, or I can go do something that makes me feel crappy. I can eat something that makes me feel nourished, or I can eat something that makes me feel crappy. I can talk to someone that makes me feel nourished. I can talk to someone that makes me feel crappy. And those are, in every moment, that's what we're doing. We're choosing between our happiness and our suffering. And so sometimes it's more, and sometimes I've even said, like, choose suffering. If that's really where you're at, like, don't be ashamed to choose suffering. I've chosen suffering many times in my life. And I don't think there's anything to be ashamed of with that. We are human beings. It is inevitable that we will have suffering. Our lives are not about avoiding suffering. That's not what this is about. It's about finding how to ride the wave of suffering, finding how to, feel okay in the midst of suffering, or how to love yourself in the midst of suffering. It's not about never suffering. And I think that's a huge misconception in like the wellness and self-help industries, and that's something that I really want to change for people who are dealing with chronic illness, is that like we're allowed to experience suffering. Our bodies are freaking annihilating us. Like it's not like we're wimps that are like, oh, I stubbed my toe and I'm like miserable. No, it's like people are losing kidneys and their hair is falling out and their bones are deforming. And I mean, it's real stuff. So, but in the face of all of that, I just really felt like my mental state, I had this choice in every moment if I was going to fall into the suffering and really just marinate in suffering, or if I was going to go and say, okay, I'm going to choose happiness in this moment. What would that look like? And sometimes it's like something stupid, like I love organizing. Sometimes it's like, I'm just going to sit here on my bed because I can't move and I'm going to like fold all my t-shirts that are in a pile or something. I don't know. It doesn't have to be monumental, right? But it just being aware of that, I think, makes a huge difference.
Yeah. I was going to say that listening, for me, that's the beginning of every self-love journey. And I really feel like it's never like, oh, I have self-love ongoing. It's moments where I kind of have to reteach myself what that means to me. And first and foremost, I just like I stop my thoughts, I stop whatever I'm doing. I'm like, okay, what am I feeling? Like I need to identify that feeling, really listen to what my body's telling, my mind's telling me, and maybe I want to bask in it for a while. In fact, I think a lot of the time I bask in it or marinate it in it, like you said. Actually, so I pulled out this paper that I have on my desk. It's called Breath Break. I have there sometimes, and a lot of the time it just isn't like for when I'm feeling stressed, maybe about work, but it really applies to everything. And it's like literal steps. If you can see it, says,
oh, that's great.
Like, close your computer and turn off your phone, lie down somewhere. I'm often in my carpet in front of my desk and take 3 deep breaths. Ask yourself the following out loud or on paper. What have I been doing or being that is causing this breakdown? And then there's like other stuff, but I love having those conversations with myself. And then the choice, do I want to stay with this for a while and really understand it? Or do I want to move forward and choose let's just say the positive, the happiness side of whatever this is, but ignoring it, pushing it to the side.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's ever really been helpful for anything
It,
um,
it comes out eventually.
yeah, exactly. Any of you who've been to therapy, it will come out eventually, which is
Yeah.
good. It's good whenever it comes out, even if it's 2 decades later. But definitely, yeah, you can't ignore that stuff. So this always happens. I want to keep talking, but it is time to wrap up. So I want to end with um, actually, in this case, since we're having this real conversation, we've talked about how we're just humans, but at the same time, others and myself consider you an influencer, or rather a leader. How would you recommend uh, anyone listening, any people with chronic illnesses, be a leader in their own lives on a personal level or even a public level?
Um, I mean, I've never really thought about that before. I mean, I guess what I would say is, the first thing that comes up for me is education and allyship. And so, what I mean by that is like when you're around people who don't get it, and this could be privately, or publicly, but a lot of us are just living our lives with our families and our friends. Um, our inclination, which is fair because we don't have a lot of energy, but us as the people with the chronic illness, our inclination might be to like, go into our shell and isolate and disconnect. And I think I want more people to, as much as you have the energy to, like, push back from that a little bit and let your loved ones know, like send them an article or something about spoon theory or whatever it might be, and just be like, this is the reality of what I'm going through. I know you don't have the same situation and I know you don't understand because you don't have to live with this, but I need you to be educated about my experience, And so I think that, like, it's like unapologetic, and it's also like righteous, you know what I mean? In the best possible way. It's like, you want me to know about your human experience because maybe you're the majority and everybody, quotes, everybody is just like you. That's not actually true. By 2020, there will be 157 million people in this country who will be experiencing a chronic illness, and 80 million of those people will have multiple chronic illnesses. And we are not a niche market. And I think that's where everything that I'm doing right now is fueled from that place. Like, you can feel it in the way that I'm even saying this to you. Like, I am angry, and I'm not angry for me. I am angry for those 157 million people that the media is not talking to, that so many people in our lives don't understand, that people are not hiring for jobs, that, like the list goes on and on, that doctors are not taking seriously, that, it's just another area where people of color are being so marginalized and completely ignored on the medical front. Like, we could have hours long conversation about it, So it's like there's this one part of this whole conversation where it's like women like you and I who have had the fortune and the privilege of actually working through so much of our stuff, and and we're still dealing with it, but we're able to maintain a very full life in our own way at the same time, and that's amazing. Like, that is amazing, and that is a very important side to it, right? Is to be able to show that we can thrive with a chronic illness. But then there's also the other side, which is all of this conversation for people who are really not being taken care of or taken seriously. And so I think the more you can get angry about it, the better, to be honest with you. I think that anger is beautiful and it's powerful and it's not bad. And I'd rather people be angry than be self-deprecating, which is kind of the two things that we usually go to, right? So I think if you want to be a leader, start by demanding that people understand what's going on with you. Demand it. And even like things like, I have a lot of food sensitivities because of my autoimmune stuff. And so I used to never tell people like what I could and couldn't eat. Like, if I get invited to like a brand dinner or like a friend's, house for a, dinner party or something, And I used to be like, if you could just have like one piece of food that I can eat, like I'll be fine. Don't worry about me, whatever. I created a whole document that basically tells people this is why Nitika can't eat certain foods. These are all the foods she can't eat. Here's some great options of what she can eat. And it's like really pleasant and like, positive. But I've become unapologetic about like, okay, this brand wants me to come check out this restaurant and like tweet about it or post about it or whatever. Are you going to honor who I am and where I'm at and not be shy about it? Like I'm angry in a good way. I think it's really good. Anger.
Yeah. Thanks for being so honest about in this way. I really agree with you. I've been channeling that a lot lately, actually, in dancing. My anger about what's going on politically, including with our community. So basically, be a leader through advocacy for yourself and for your community.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is perfect. So thank you. And thank you for everything you've said, everything that you do. It's been a true honor having you on this podcast. And I'll tell everyone where to find you, about Chronicon, because there are so many avenues where you have provided value. And I want to make sure everybody knows about them. So thanks again for being on this podcast, and I will definitely be talking to you soon.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
That's a wrap on another episode in our Spoonie Leader series with Nitika Chopra. You can find her doing weekly content in her free Facebook group, the Chronic Illness Crew, and daily on her Instagram @Nitika Chopra. I'll definitely put those links in the show notes. She's also started her own podcast called The Point of Pain, so definitely check that out also. As for this podcast, if you like these episodes, please share. Also, taking a quick second right now to share some feedback with a rating and review would be highly appreciated. The more feedback, the better the show. If you want to reach out to me directly, feel free to email eva@wellacopia.com. And until next time, be kind, be gentle, be badass.